Welcome back to Sci-Fi Travelers, friends. In this episode, we'll delve into the story of James and Maya. If you're ready, let's begin. A man rescued an alien child, but was shocked when he found out who the child's mother was. The rain on Verdanth did not fall so much as it prosecuted. It came down in slanting silver sheets that hissed where they struck, eating the paint off James's outpost one molecule at a time, and reminding him hourly that he had chosen to live on a moon whose weather actively wanted him dead. He had a name for the place, which he used with the tenderness a man reserves for something he cannot leave. He called it the mudball. The mudball did not care what he called it. The mudball just kept raining. Atmospheric acidity climbing, announced Doreen from somewhere near the ceiling, her single optic swiveling with the enthusiasm of a creature who had long ago made peace with disappointment. Doreen was a housekeeping drone 3 software generations past retirement, and she had 2 settings, judgmental and asleep. Recommend remaining indoors. Also recommend a personality transplant, but that ship has sailed. Log it and hush, James said, pulling his slicker tight. Down in the western tangle, a transport had come screaming out of the storm an hour ago, low and wrong and shedding pieces, and it had folded itself into the canopy with a sound like the sky clearing its throat. Where things fell, things could be salvaged. Where things could be salvaged, James ate. It was not a complicated philosophy, but it had kept him breathing for 11 years, which on the mudball counted as a distinguished career. You are going out into a corrosive downpour, Doreen observed, to pick through a crash site alone in the dark, on a moon where the wildlife considers you a food group. That's the plan. I want it on record that I raised objections. It's always on record, Doreen. Your whole existence is a complaint with a battery. He went out into it. The jungle received him the way it received everything, hungrily. Vast fern things the size of cathedrals dripped acid from their fronds, and the dark between them boiled with sounds that had teeth in them. Twice something big paced him just out of the lamplight, thought about it, and decided the rain was a better bet than the man with the plasma cutter. James kept walking. He had learned long ago that on Verdanth you did not run, because running told the moon you were prey, and the moon was always taking notes. The wreck, when he reached it, was better than he'd hoped and worse than he'd feared. Alien make, sleek, dark-hulled, nothing he recognized, which meant the parts would fetch a fortune from buyers who asked no questions. It was also still ticking as it cooled, and something about the shape of it made the back of his neck go cold in a way the rain hadn't managed. He told himself that was the acidity. He was lying, and some quiet salvager's instinct in him knew it. He was halfway through prying a power cell loose, good cell, clean, worth a month of not starving when he heard the sound. Not a hiss. Not a howl, a small, wet, entirely unmechanical cough. James froze. Doreen, he said into his collar, tell me that was you. I am 400 meters away being sensible, Doreen replied. That was not me. He followed the cough into the ribs of the ship, boots slipping in coolant, and found it wedged behind a crumpled bulkhead where the hull had caved just enough to make a pocket the falling debris had missed. Small, curled, breathing in the shallow, stubborn way of a thing that has decided, against considerable evidence, to keep living. A child. An alien child, pale and shivering, with a smear of blue where something had bled, and a pair of ears longer than any ear had a business being, swept back and delicate and unmistakably not human. One small fist was locked around a pendant that caught his lamplight and for just a moment seemed to catch something else, some faint pulse of light from deep inside itself, before going dark. The child opened its eyes, looked at the enormous drenched human looming over it with a plasma cutter in one hand, and did not scream. Just looked with an exhausted, ancient sort of patience as if to say, well, you'll do. Every rule James had ever written for himself lined up in his head and cleared its throat. Rule 1. Salvage things, not people. People had families, and families had questions, and questions had a way of arriving on the ends of weapons. Rule 2. The mud ball keeps what it kills, and getting sentimental about it just added your name to the ledger. Rule 3, and this was the big one, the one underlined twice. Never, ever take on a problem you can't set down. James looked at the small, ridiculous, long-eared face. He set down the power cell. He picked up the child. "Doreen," he said, tucking the shivering weight inside his slicker where the rain couldn't reach it, "start the heater. And get the good rations out." There was a pause on the line, a long one for a drone. "That," said Doreen at last, with what might in a warmer machine have passed for foreboding, "is deeply irresponsible." "Yeah," James agreed, and started the long walk home through the hungry dark. Log it. The child recovered the way weeds recover, quietly, stubbornly, and in complete defiance of the odds. For the first 2 days she mostly slept, curled in the crate James had lined with his least offensive blanket, waking only to eat and to regard him with the wary suspicion of a small creature, calculating exactly how much trouble the large creature intended. By the 3rd day the blue smear had scabbed to something healthier, the fever had broken, and she had begun to walk the perimeter of the outpost's single habitable room with the grave, methodical air of a general inspecting a fortification she did not think much of. She would not tell him her name. This was partly because she would not speak his language, and partly, he suspected, because she had taken one look at him and decided he did not rate 1. So he named her himself, the way you name a stray, which is to say badly. He called her Sprout on account of her being small, green around nothing in particular, and prone to appearing in places she had not been a moment before. "That is not a name," Doreen said. "That is what you call a houseplant. You're a vacuum cleaner with opinions. You don't get a vote on names." Sprout, for her part, seemed to accept it. When he said it she would look up, ears twitching in a way he was learning to read. 1 flick meant what 2 flicks meant, asterisk no asterisk, and a slow fold back meant she was about to do something he would spend the next hour cleaning up. She had reflexes that had no business belonging to a child. When Doreen dropped a wrench, Sprout was under the table before it hit the floor, coiled, watching the door. When the outpost's ancient heater clanked, she flinched toward the nearest exit and then, catching herself, straightened with a small dignity that broke something in James's chest he'd thought was long since rusted shut. Somebody had taught her to be afraid on schedule. He didn't know who, and he found he badly wanted to. Feeding her was a diplomatic incident. James's emergency rations came in 6 flavors, all of which tasted like the same regret, and Sprout ate them in an order. Always the gray cube first, then the brown, never the red, and if he handed them to her out of sequence, she would set the wrong one down with the withering patience of a maitre d' correcting a barbarian. When he finally got the order right, she rewarded him with the closest thing to approval he'd seen, which was not smiling but was aggressively not frowning, and he took the win. They found a game on the 4th day. She drew it in the condensation on the window, a grid, small stones, rules he pieced together by losing badly 11 times in a row while she watched him with the serene contempt of a much older mind wearing a much smaller face. In return, he taught her the one thing that mattered on the mud ball, dragging her to the door during a squall and pointing at the silver rain, and then at the smoking hole it burned in a scrap of hull. Bad. She flicked her ears twice solemnly. No. They understood each other on the important subject. It felt absurdly like a treaty between nations, but the pendant bothered him. She never took it off, and he never asked her to, and he might have let it go entirely except that on the 5th night the sky over Verdansk flickered, a hard, high, unnatural flicker, like something enormous passing between the moon and its star, and the pendant answered. It woke against her collarbone with a soft internal pulse of light, throbbing once, twice, in time with the flicker overhead, and then went dark as if it had said something it shouldn't have. Sprout's hand closed over it fast. She looked at James, and for the first time the ancient patience in her face cracked, just slightly, into something that was unmistakably fear. "Doreen," James said slowly, "what was that flicker, up top?" "Unknown," Doreen said, and for once there was no editorial in it. Nothing in orbit on my scopes, which either means nothing is there or something is there that does not wish to be on my scopes. I leave it to you to decide which is more comforting. Neither is comforting. Correct. It got less comforting. The predators changed. For 11 years the Mudball's wildlife had circled the outpost the way weather circles, mindless, hungry, opportunistic. Now they came with purpose. James watched from the window as 3 of the big pacing things arranged themselves along the tree line, not lunging, not testing the fence, just asterisk sitting, facing the outpost, patient as investors. Predators did not sit. Predators did not wait. Something was making them wait, and it was not the rain, and it was not James, and it was not anything that belonged on a green moon at the ragged edge of nowhere. He looked at the small girl with the impossible ears, curled asleep now over the humming pendant that talked to the sky, and understood, with the slow sinking certainty of a man reading his own name on a bill he could not pay, that he had not found a lost tourist's child. He had found somebody's reason. Doreen, he said quietly so as not to wake her, that flicker, log everything, and wake me if the sky does it again. For once, the drone did not tell him he was being irresponsible. Somehow that was worse. The sky did it again on the 7th morning, and this time it did not stop at flickering. The storms that had prosecuted the outpost for a week broke all at once, the silver rain thinning to mist and then to nothing, the clouds peeling back like a wound deciding to heal. For about 90 seconds James stood in his doorway breathing air that did not try to dissolve him and thought, foolishly, that things were looking up. Then the mist above the canopy began to glow from within, and the glow resolved into a shape, and the shape resolved into a warship. It came down slow, the way big predators move when they know nothing can stop them. A long dark wedge of a thing sliding through the fog, silent in a way that machinery that size had no right to be, its hull drinking the morning light rather than reflecting it. Every pacing shadow along the tree line rose at once and melted backward into the jungle, which told James everything. Even the Mudball's monsters knew when to leave the room. "Doreen," he said, very calmly, "what am I looking at?" "A capital-class vessel of unfamiliar design," Doreen reported. "Approximately 6,000 tons, weapons hot, shields nominal. My professional assessment is that we are going to die, and I would like it noted that I raised objections at every prior stage." Noted. He did the only thing a man in his position could reasonably do, which was pick up his plasma cutter, a tool designed to gently part sheet metal, and in no sense a weapon, and stand in his own doorway with it held in a grip that he hoped read as asterisk menacing, and probably read as this man is about to be a stain asterisk. Behind him, Sprout had gone very still, pressed to the wall, one hand locked over the pendant, watching the descending ship with an expression he couldn't parse and didn't like. The warship settled onto the clearing his outpost shared with the wreckage, crushing a decade of carefully hoarded scrap flat under its landing struts, which James found he resented even in the shadow of imminent death. A ramp lowered from its belly with a hiss of released pressure, light spilled out, and down the ramp, through the steam, walked a woman. She was human-shaped in every line, tall, dark-haired, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once in her life had to check whether a room was safe because rooms simply became safe when she entered them. And she was armed, and she was luminous with a fury so total it arrived before she did. And her ears were long, swept back, delicate, impossible, the exact same impossible as the small pear currently trembling against his wall. James's brain, which had been rehearsing a number of dignified last words, delivered instead the only thought that fit. "Oh no, you," the woman said, and her voice was low and beautiful and carried the specific temperature of open space. "Human, step away from the child." "Okay, see, that's a reasonable request," James said, not stepping anywhere. "And I want to honor it, I really do. But the last few people who came looking for this kid brought the local wildlife with them and made it sit down. So you'll forgive me if I'd like a name and a species, and maybe a reference before I hand over the small person I've been feeding my worst rations to for a week." The fury flickered. Something moved behind its surprise, he thought, that he was still talking. Then a small voice cracked the standoff clean in half. Sprout had come off the wall. She was staring at the woman with her whole face undone, ears forward, and she said a word, one word, in the language she had refused to give him for 7 days, and the woman's terrible composure shattered like dropped glass. The gun dropped. The queen dropped. In 2 strides she was across the clearing, and on her knees in the mud of a moon she plainly considered beneath her, gathering the child up, and Sprout was clinging to her, and making a sound James had never heard from her. A small, broken, relieved sound, and the 2 long-eared heads bent together, dark hair and pale, and something that had been wound tight in the child for 7 days simply let go. James lowered the plasma cutter. It seemed rude to point it at that. "So," he said, to nobody, to Doreen, to the universe, "that's the mother, then." "That," said Doreen, "would be my assessment." The woman looked up at him over the child's head, and the fury was gone, replaced by something rawer and far more complicated, gratitude fighting with suspicion, fighting with a bone-deep exhaustion he recognized, because he saw a smaller version of it every time Sprout flinched at the heater. She stood, the child on her hip, and studied him the way she'd studied the tree line, and when she spoke again her voice had changed. "You sheltered her," she said. "A human on this rock at the edge of nowhere, fed her, healed her, asked nothing." She said it like an accusation, like it did not compute. "Why?" Honestly, James shrugged. She looked like she'd do. The woman stared at him. "I am Maya," she said at last, and even mud-stained and shaking she said it like the word ought to mean something, like it had once made Fleet's turn. "And you have no idea what you have done, human. No idea at all." "I get that a lot," James said. "You want a ration cube. Gray one first, she's very particular." Maya did not, it turned out, want a ration cube. Maya wanted to inspect his coffee. She had followed him inside. Cautiously, the child asleep against her shoulder now that the terror had drained out of her. One hand never straying far from the weapon on her hip. And when James put the battered kettle on, she had crossed the room and picked up the pouch of grounds and turned it over and sniffed it, with the narrow-eyed diligence of someone who fully expected to find poison and would be almost disappointed not to. "It's coffee," James said. "It's the one luxury on this moon that hasn't tried to kill me. If I were going to poison anybody, I'd have better manners than to do it with the good stuff. Everyone I have trusted in the last 11 months has attempted to kill me," Maya said, setting the pouch down with the air of someone granting it a provisional pardon. 2 of them succeeded partway. That's a rough conversion rate. It has been a rough 11 months. She sat, finally, at his one table, in his one other chair, laying the sleeping child across her lap, and in the small yellow light of the outpost she told him, grudgingly, in pieces, watching his face for the exact moment he'd try to use it against her, who she was. And James, stirring 2 cups of coffee he was fairly sure neither of them would drink, listened, and felt the floor of his ordinary salvager's life quietly drop out from under him. Her name, it developed, was one that a dozen fleets currently spoke the way other people spoke about weather systems and tax audits. Maya of the Ashen Throne. Until 11 months ago, she had ruled a stretch of Star Empire James had heard of only as a rumor to frighten smugglers, a domain vast and old and dreadful. And then her regent, a man she described in 3 words James won't repeat in front of the drone, had unseated her in a single bloody night, murdered most of the people she loved, and installed himself on a throne that was not, by the rules that govern such things, actually his to sit on. Because the throne did not answer to force. It answered to blood. Specifically, it answered to a bloodline-locked key, an object that could only be opened by the living heir, without which no usurper could ever be more than a man squatting in a nice chair pretending. And the key, James said slowly, looking at the small glowing pendant rising and falling on the child's chest. You have been feeding your worst rations, Maya said. To the only person in the galaxy who can legitimize a throne, a dozen fleets are burning worlds to claim. Yes, that pendant is bloodlocked to her. It cannot be forced, cannot be copied, cannot be faked. It opens for her and only while she lives. Her jaw tightened, which is why he does not want her dead. He wants her asterisk taken. A dead heir ends his claim forever. A living captive one, she didn't finish. Makes him a king, James said. Makes him a king. James set the coffee down. And here I thought the worst thing on my property was the mold. Something crossed Maya's face then, not quite a smile. She seemed physically incapable of one, but a loosening, a flicker of surprise that the human across the table had made a joke instead of a demand. She'd been braced, he realized, for the other thing. For the moment he understood exactly what he was holding and started to wonder what it was worth. She had told him the truth, expecting it to become a knife. "You are recalculating," she said, watching him. "I would. Any sane creature would. You could sell what you now know. Sell asterisk or asterisk. There are those who would give you more wealth than this squalid moon has ever seen." "Lady," James said, "I've spent 11 years learning that everything valuable on this rock will eventually try to eat me. I'm not real inclined to start collecting more of it." He nodded at the sleeping child. "Besides, she likes the gray cube first. You don't turn in somebody who's that particular. It'd be rude." Maya looked at him for a long moment, and the suspicion in her face did not vanish. He suspected nothing would ever fully vanish it again, but it shifted, made room for something warier and warmer, something that had forgotten what it was doing there. Which was, of course, the exact moment Doreen ruined it. "Apologies for interrupting what I can only assume is a fragile diplomatic breakthrough," the drone said from the ceiling, "but I have a new object in orbit. High, small, cold. It arrived without moving, which is a neat trick, and it is presently doing nothing at all in a manner I find deeply threatening." Maya was on her feet before the sentence ended. The child gathered up, the weapon out, the whole regal exhaustion burned off her in an instant and replaced with something honed. "A tracker beacon," she said low. "He's found the crash site. That thing is marking us for what comes next." "Great," James said, already moving, already reaching for the one thing on the mudball he actually trusted, which was a very large wrench. "So what comes next?" "Everything I have spent 11 months running from." She looked at him, and there was an apology in it, and underneath the apology something that was almost, grudgingly, like relief at not being alone. "I am sorry, human. You did a decent thing. The galaxy is about to make you regret it." "Wouldn't be the first decent thing this moon's punished me for," James said, hefting the wrench. "Doreen, seal the shutters and put the coffee on. If we're getting invaded, I'm at least drinking it first." What came next arrived 4 hours later, and it had a name, and the name was Axel. They watched him come down on Doreen's cracked exterior feed, a smaller ship than Maya's, sleeker, meaner, the kind of vessel built by someone who had decided that mercy added unnecessary weight. It landed at the tree line rather than the clearing, which James understood was a message. "I am not in a hurry. You are not going anywhere I cannot follow." Down its ramp came a strike team in matte armor that ate the light, and at their center a man who moved like Maya moved, that same unhurried certainty, except where Maya's certainty had grief underneath it. This man's had nothing underneath it at all. "Axel," Maya said, and the way she said it told James the whole history in one syllable. "The Regent's blade. He hunted my house to the ground. He is very good, he is very patient, and he has no sense of humor whatsoever." "Well, that's just unforgivable," James said. "You can take a man's throne, but no jokes. Where does he get off?" "He got off my asterisk homeworld," Maya said grimly, "over the bodies of my honor guard. Do not underestimate him. Everyone who underestimated him is a cautionary tale. The outpost would not hold, and they all knew it. So they did the one thing Axel, for all his patience, could not have planned for. They went out into the mudball. Because Axel knew war and Axel knew hunting, but Axel did not know *verdanth*, and James had spent 11 years learning the moon the way you learn a spiteful roommate. Every mood, every trap, every place where the ground pretended to be ground and wasn't. They ran into the green. Maya carried the child, James carried the wrench and 11 years of grudges against the terrain, which he now got to spend all at once. He led Axel's team through a stand of the cathedral ferns and detonated a salvaged coolant cell under the acid-heavy canopy, and the fronds wept their silver rain down onto matte armor in a hissing sheet. And 2 of the strike team learned what James had learned in his first month, which was that on this moon the sky itself was a weapon, and you did not, under any circumstances, stand under a shaken tree. He steered them across a stretch of innocent-looking moss that was in fact the lid over an acid geyser due by his long and grudging acquaintance to exhale in roughly. He counted now and the moss opened and the geyser exhaled, and Axel's team got smaller again. "You are enjoying this," Maya said, pressed beside him behind a fallen trunk while something enormous and migratory thundered past in the mist, drawn by the noise exactly as James had bet it would be. 11 years, Maya. 11 years this moon has tried to kill me every single day, and I never once got to introduce it to somebody I wanted it to kill. This is the best day I've had since I got here. He grinned at her through the mud. "I'm basically hosting." And she laughed. It caught them both off guard, a short, startled, wholly involuntary sound, gone almost before it arrived, and she looked appalled at herself for making it, like laughter was a state secret she'd let slip. But it had happened. In 11 months of running, someone had made the exiled war queen of the Ashen Throne laugh in a mudhole while an assassin hunted her child, and the someone was a salvager with a wrench, and neither of them quite knew what to do with that. They lost Axel's team in the deep jungle as the light failed, not defeated. Never that, just slowed forced to move at the pace of men who no longer trusted the ground, and holed up in a hollow beneath the roots of one of the great ferns, where the acid couldn't reach and the dark hid them. Sprout, exhausted past fear, fell asleep between the 2 adults almost at once, one small hand fisted in James's sleeve and the other in her mother's, anchoring herself to both of them like a bridge deciding which shore to belong to. Neither of them moved to wake her. Neither of them, James noticed, moved much at all. "You could have handed us to him," Maya said quietly into the dark. "At the tree line, he'd have paid. He'd have let you live. Axel keeps his bargains. It is the one thing about him I would call honorable. You had every reason and no obligation." "Yeah, well." James looked down at the small hand knotted in his sleeve. "Turns out I'm bad at math." He was quiet a moment. "It got real quiet out here before you 2 crashed into my life. 11 years of a drone telling me I'm irresponsible and a moon telling me I'm lunch. I didn't notice how quiet it had gotten until it stopped." He hadn't meant to say it. It came out anyway, the way true things do at the bottom of a hole in the dark. Maya was silent for a long moment. Then very carefully, as if setting down something that might break, she let her head rest back against the root beside his, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through the cold. "I had a kingdom," she said softly. "Fleets, worlds. Everyone who has ever mattered to me is dead, except the child sleeping on your arm." A pause. "And tonight, in a mud hole, hunted with nothing, this is the safest I have felt in 11 months. "Don't tell the moon," James murmured. "It'll take it personally." Above them in the dark canopy, Doreen's little running lights blinked once. She had followed them out. She said nothing at all, no complaint, no editorial, no logged objection. She just watched the 3 of them, tangled together in the roots, and filed the whole thing silently under *concerning*. Axel did not underestimate them again. That was the trouble with a man who kept no jokes and made no bargains he didn't intend to honor. He learned. By dawn, he had stopped chasing them through terrain he couldn't read and started doing the one thing James hadn't planned for, which was to stop trying to catch them and simply wait somewhere they'd have to come back to. He waited at the outpost, and he waited beside Doreen's charging cradle and Doreen's spare power cells and the water reclaimer, everything, in short, that 3 people and a child needed to keep living on a moon that wanted them dead. Axel understood that he did not have to be faster than James. He only had to be patient enough to let Verdant do the work, which was, James thought bitterly, exactly the play he'd have made himself. They came back at midday because they had to, low on water, the child feverish again from the cold and the running, and Axel let them get almost to the door before he stepped out of the outpost's shadow with his weapon already leveled, not at Maya, not at the child, but at James. "Clever," Axel said. His voice was flat and unhurried and entirely without malice, which was somehow worse than if he'd sneered. "The moon, the traps. I have lost 6 good soldiers to a scavenger and a wrench. That is more than I lost taking her capital." He said it as a fact, not a compliment. "But cleverness runs out, and you brought yourselves back to me because that is what the living must do. They must eat. They must drink. It makes them predictable. You're a real ray of sunshine, you know that," James said. "Has anyone told you? Because somebody should tell you." "Maya," Axel did not so much as glance at James's mouth. "The pendant. Give it to me and the human lives. I will take you and the child alive both, as the regent requires. But the salvager is not required. He is not part of the bargain. He is a courtesy I am extending once because he fought well." The weapon did not waver from James's chest. "Refuse, and the courtesy expires. Choose." And there it was. James watched it land on Maya's face, and he watched her do the arithmetic she had done 1,000 times across 11 months of exile. The cold sovereign math that had kept her and her daughter alive when everyone else in her house had died. He was one man, a stranger, a salvager she had known for 8 days. The child was a bloodline, a throne, the last of everything she was. Against that, a human with a wrench weighed nothing. He knew the sum. He'd have run it the same way. He almost nodded at her. "Go on, it's fine, it's just math." Maya looked at Axel. She looked at the weapon on James's chest. She looked at James, at the mud on him, and the ridiculous wrench, and the 8 days of the safest she'd felt in a year. And something happened in her face that James had not seen there once, not through the crash or the coup or the running, something that frightened her far more than any of it. She could not make the numbers come out right. "No," she said. Axel's head tilted a fraction. It was, James suspected, the most surprised the man had been in years. "You would trade the throne, the child's birthright, everything your house died for a scavenger." "I would trade nothing," Maya said, and stepped forward, putting herself between the weapon and James, which was so completely backward from how any of this was supposed to go that even Axel hesitated. "The child stays hidden. The pendant stays with her, and you will take *me alive, as your regent wants his heir's mother as leverage, as a hostage, whatever use you can invent in exchange for both of them walking free. Him and her. That is the bargain. That is the only bargain." "Maya," James said, "that is a terrible bargain, do not." "Be quiet," Maya said, not unkindly, not looking at him. "For once in your relentlessly talkative life, human, be quiet *, because I am doing something and I need it to work." And then, lower just for him, in a voice that shook exactly once, "You said it got quiet before us. It got quiet for me too. 11 years for you. 11 months for me. I am not," her jaw set, "I am not going to be the reason it goes quiet again." Axel considered the offer with the terrible patience of a man weighing cargo. A hostage queen was, James could see him calculating, nearly as good as a captured heir. Leverage, the regent could use to draw the child out at leisure, on his own terms, with the whole armada instead of one strike team. The math worked for him too. That was the horror of it. It worked for everybody except the 2 people it was tearing in half. "Acceptable," Axel said at last. And James, who had spent 11 years learning that the only way to survive a trap you couldn't win was to be holding a plan nobody knew you had, met Maya's eyes for half a second long enough, just barely long enough, to see that she saw it too, that under the fear she was counting on it. And then he did the most useful thing available to a salvager whose lady had just sold herself to save him. He looked utterly, convincingly defeated. "Doreen," he said, hollow-beaten, to the drone hovering meekly at the outpost door. "Stand down, log it, log all of it." "Logging," said Doreen. What Axel did not know, what nobody in the clearing knew except a beaten-looking man, and a war queen, and a 3 generations obsolete housekeeping drone, was that James had spent 11 years hoarding junk on this moon for exactly one reason. You never knew when you'd need it. And log it, to Doreen, had always been code for something else entirely. The Regent's Armada arrived to collect its prize the following dawn, and it arrived the way a foreclosure arrives, slow, total, and profoundly unbothered. A dozen capital ships slid out of the fading dark and hung over the canopy, and Verdanth, for the first time in 11 years, went utterly silent beneath them. Even the moon, it seemed, knew better than to make noise. Axel stood in the clearing with Maya beside him, wrists bound, chin level, playing the captured queen exactly as agreed. And if she looked less defeated than a captive should, Axel put it down to pride. Above them the flagship opened a docking bay wide enough to swallow the outpost whole, and James, standing where he'd been told to stand, looking as harmless as a man could look, said the only word that mattered: "Doreen, log it." 11 years of hoarding paid out all at once, because James had never salvaged for money, not really. He'd salvaged because a man alone on a hostile moon learns to keep every dead ship's teeth in case he ever needs to bite. And the canopy of Verdanth, unbeknownst to a single admiral in that fleet, was a graveyard. 300 wrecks he'd stripped and gutted and quietly over 11 patient years rewired. Coolant cells. Reactor cores with the safeties filed off. Old military targeting stacks he'd never sold because Doreen had asked him, once in her flat little voice, to keep them. Just in case, asterisk, she'd said. He'd thought she was malfunctioning. Doreen had been planning. The whole forest lit up. 300 derelict hulls that the Armada's scopes had dismissed as scrap woke at once under the control of a housekeeping drone who had spent 3 obsolete generations being underestimated and had developed opinions about it. They did not fire like warships. They fired like asterisk junk, wild, filthy, unpredictable, coolant and plasma and raw overloading reactor light vomiting up through the canopy from 300 angles. No tactician would ever war game, because no tactician believed garbage could shoot back. Half the fleet's targeting solution simply broke. You cannot lock onto a threat your doctrine says isn't there. "That is impossible," Axel said, which was the closest he had come all week to an emotion. "Yeah," James agreed, and hit him with the wrench. It was not a dignified blow. It was the single most satisfying moment of James's entire life. Axel folded, and Maya's bindings, which James had tightened himself personally with great theatrical care and a jammed latch, fell off her wrists, and she came up with Axel's own weapon already in her hands, luminous and terrible, and finally not running. But the true weapon wasn't the junk fleet, and it wasn't the wrench. It was the signal. Because every one of those 300 derelicts, screaming up into the dark, carried on Doreen's broadcast a single bloodlocked pulse. The heir's frequency. The one thing the loyal remnants of Maya's house had been scouring the galaxy for 11 months to find. The beacon of a living queen who had refused to die quietly. And out past the edge of the Regent's Armada, folding in from the black where they had been waiting and hoping and grieving, came ships. Not many. Enough. The last loyal fleet of the Ashen Throne, arriving to the sound of their queen announcing, across every channel, that she was alive, that her daughter was alive, and that the man squatting on her chair had exactly one chance to climb down. The battle was brief. Usurpers do poorly the moment the lie holds their crown up is exposed to daylight, and a bloodline is a stubborn thing. Afterward, days afterward, when the armada had scattered or surrendered, and the regent's own admirals had handed him over rather than share his fate, when the throne was Maya's again in every way that the old bloodlocked laws demanded, she came back down to the mudball. She did not have to. That was the thing James kept turning over. She had a kingdom now, fleets, worlds. Everyone who mattered to her was. No, not everyone. Sprout came off the ramp first and hit him at a dead run, ears forward, and said his name, his actual name, the first word of his language she'd ever willingly given him, and demanded with great authority the gray cube. James, salvager, hermit, professional avoider of anything he couldn't set down, discovered he was crying in front of an alien child and did not especially care. "You could rule from anywhere," Maya said, coming down after her, a queen again in every line, and yet standing in his mud like it was nothing, like it was somewhere she'd chosen. I looked into it. There is no law that requires the ashen throne be governed from the capital. A pause, almost asterisk a smile she'd been practicing. There is also no law that says a queen may not keep a consort who talks too much and owns a great deal of garbage. "That's a coincidence," James said, wiping his face unashamed, "because I checked, and there's no law on this moon against it either. Mostly because there's no law on this moon, or plumbing. I should warn you about the plumbing. I have survived a coup, an armada, and 8 days of your rations," Maya said. "I will survive the plumbing." Above them, Doreen's running lights blinked once, twice, in what any warmer machine would have called satisfaction. "For the record," the drone announced, to no one, to the clearing, to the whole ridiculous cosmos that had come howling for a child and been beaten back by a hermit and a wrench and 300 pieces of well-organized trash. "I would like it noted that adopting the child, harboring the fugitive, provoking the empire, and now marrying the queen were all, individually and collectively, deeply irresponsible." James looked at Maya. Maya looked at the child between them, already tugging them both toward the outpost and the rations, and the small warm quiet the three of them had built out of a mudhole at the edge of nowhere. "Log it," he said, and for the first time in 3 obsolete generations, Doreen sounded almost fond. "Logged. The end. We've reached the end of another story, friends. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next story. Goodbye.